Good morning, all attendees.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Let me finish typing something up, and then maybe someone will join, and we can have a more fun meeting.
Sounds great.
So give me one quick second. Okay, so no one has joined us. So therefore, the only discussion item I had was to discuss GitLab shell just a wee bit, just because I feel like this project is getting close to attempt number 2. And since Amy, you're here and you've been involved in the same conversations that I've kind of seen, I was hoping that we could kind of provide like just a generic status update as to what our intentions are as far as scheduling when this work might happen. As far as I know, the last update that we had was that we wanted to complete testing the rollback procedure, which was done, I think 1 or 2 weeks ago at this point. Maybe it was last week. The readiness review is in progress. I just saw not this Igor, the other Igor, I forget his last name, was still working on some final improvements and asked me for a final review of that readiness review. I did that this morning and had just, I think, 3 final items that I wanted to see improvements done. So I left that feedback. But as far as I know, that's the last thing that's preventing us from doing that take 2, correct?
I agree. Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Okay.
So I think we don't have to, the second the readiness review is done, we don't have to roll straight to production. So I think we can fit it around our other projects. I know Ahmad today has been like fully on registry all day. We have a few other things like that are floating around. So we can't do anything until we have the readiness review, but once we get it, yeah, we can schedule it in as makes sense for us.
So from my perspective, it sounds like we should be able to have the readiness review completed by the end of this week if all goes well, because Igor is tightly working on this very well. Like he's keeping track of everything very closely. And I think they're eager to see this get rolled in. So maybe we could try to schedule this in for next week, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that probably makes good sense. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Perfect. Do you know of anything that would prevent us from attempting this next week outside of completing the readiness review of this particular project in general?
Only the monthly release. If depending on how deployments go, like if this is going, I mean, we'll have other changes for sure, but if we don't want to add another change to the pile, that's the only reason I can think of.
Okay.
Otherwise, I think it should be good to go.
Okay. So I think we'll probably have the capability to work with the release manager at that moment in time if necessary. So hopefully it wouldn't be too bad, but you know, if we could always delay a week if necessary. Like it doesn't seem like it's that pressing. So cool.
Exactly.
All right.
Perfect.
Well, that's the only thing I wanted to bring up. I've been kind of far away from Kubernetes land lately anyway, so it's been kind of hard for me to keep up with other projects. So I'm curious, Amy, if there's anything that you wanted to add to our agenda to discuss or converse about, and Igor for that matter.
A couple of things maybe I had in my mind. They're both a bit hazy. I am starting to think, I'll open up an issue so we can discuss this, but I'm starting to think about Q2 and sort of beyond. 2 projects that would be amazing for us to be able to sort of get into projects in the next sort of month, if so, kind of gauging how comfortable you feel is. One is to start working on the cluster recreation and do enough that we could recreate a cluster and get some more IPs. that will be non-negotiable, because I believe we're going to actually start to hit problems like in the next sort of few months, or if we don't do something.
So we had both a short-term and a long-term mitigation for the CloudNet device. The short-term mitigation is that we do have available IP addresses. We just need to assign those
okay,
to the
great.
net device, which that should be a simple merge request and checking our saturation metric after that merge request is pushed into play. The long-term goal would be to figure out how to build a new NAT device and then attach a cluster behind it. And for that, realistically, what we would need to accomplish is probably the first step of rebuilding a cluster, which in our last demo meeting, we decided that we should just rebuild a test cluster, or rebuild a cluster without any changes.
Yes.
Just to make sure that at least our documentation for having the ability to rebuild a cluster is legit and that we're not missing anything in our documentation. We don't want a situation where we rebuild a cluster and then something isn't working because we didn't have that process documented.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in my mind, I see it as, because this is going to take a little while to accomplish, is that we probably want to go ahead and perform our short-term solution now. Prioritize the rebuild of a cluster in probably our staging environment. And, assuming best case scenario, everything goes off without any problems at all, right? Proceed to rebuild a cluster in production, which is going to be very iffy because that's production workloads, but rebuild a cluster in production with it sitting behind a new CloudNet device. Which that in itself would be an entire project, such as doing the exact same thing in staging first and then recreating that in production.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And would you where would you see in terms of that project the simplifying the cluster rebuild? Would that be like a phase following that? Once we've done it, we could start to identify stuff?
So the step of us performing that initial rebuild and staging would feed knowledge that we gain from that process, will feed into what we need to prioritize.
Yeah. Okay.
So that might become, we might learn something that might block us from wanting to rebuild a cluster in production, for example, and we would want to mitigate that, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, great. And then the other one that's sort of in a maybe more hazy state that Graham's been thinking about is the all of the problems around k8s workloads, and trying to actually get a handle on what are all the pain points that people feel around that, and how can we start turning some of those into a project as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of ideas, and we've got a lot of situations where if we could solve some of those problems, that would enable a lot of other teams to start being able to automatically deploy. If we could work on some of those, I feel like we have a lot of battling priorities at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm hoping that some of this stuff might be a case of, if we can find a way to separate some of it apart, it might make it easier for us to start optimizing for like specific cases. So interwoven right now that it's quite difficult to take one piece and say we've just improved this bit and kind of ignore the others. So I'm hoping that we can get that into a project as well, that we could then start working on next quarter as well.
So no, Graham has a massive issue full of various ideas. What do we need to do to get that into a project form?
Yeah, so he's still working on that. I haven't read the latest bit. Oh, great. So he's actually put quite a lot of extra stuff on this. So what I think we need to I need to read it closer, but my guess will be we need to start finding, like, kind of grouping these problems and figure out, because I think sometimes we have related problems that we can hopefully solve in one project. And then I think some of them are sort of other problems that we can then prioritize. Once we have those buckets, we can maybe sort of figure out like what's the top problem we're trying to solve now and figure out the solution for that.
Okay. There's a lot.
There's a lot in here. So we're certainly going to need to have this in some other formats. Like this isn't going to end up being like a single epic that we can just say, here are 3 issues and off we go, right? So this is probably a blueprint. I'll see what Graham thinks about that, but this is going to probably end up being some sort of state of like, here's where we currently are, here's our situation. Maybe it's here's where we want to eventually end up, and here are some phases in the middle, or something along those lines. But for now, I would say don't worry too much about this one. I know Graham is actively working on this. I'll spend a bit of time with him, see if we can get this into something where what I'm wondering is whether we maybe try and get these into sort of problem buckets.
Yeah.
And then we can do some prioritization, right? Which we've done in the past and we've kind of thought about, because some of these things are like, this really helps somebody in distribution, or this really helps somebody in reliability, or this really helps our deployments, right? But they're going to have very different use cases. So I think we might need to sort of play around with some of the problems as well.
Yeah.
And then of course it's requirements, right? Because I think it's also, we maybe don't necessarily want to just straight pull out a problem and put something in. It might actually be a good time for us to step back and think, if we were designing this thing fresh, what would be the requirements? What do people actually want to see, and how do we achieve that? So I'm not expecting this to end up being a single epic. I think this is probably, I don't know, a year of work. It feels like it could be some fairly big pieces. So we'll see if we can get that in a slightly more digestible format so that people can drop in and add comments maybe on specific pieces.
Yeah, I think like a gut reaction I have is that we really want to try to enable other development teams to be able to auto deploy their stuff, like the container registry, for example. Yeah. So anything that kind of prioritizes work that gets us those particular areas first might be worth prioritizing. But I do understand that there's a lot of various items in here we want to improve. So there might be different priorities depending on who you talk to. Because like,
yeah,
for me in particular, like chart upgrades have been very painful. I'm glad with that we've got something automating a portion of that, but like still the review process for that is not kind to us.
It's not great. Yeah. I think that could be its own project, because I think there's a whole sort of turn chart upgrades into a deployment approach, right? We have zero visibility. In fact, I have an issue to write up because I had a heap of fun the other week because I got pinged on an issue from distribution, and it was such a great example because I got pinged on an issue which someone had a specific commit that they wanted to know when specifically did that go out. That's a really difficult question to answer with chart bumps.
Yeah.
That was really tricky. So there's a really big gap, and that's a question which everyone who is deploying in the monolith just gets for free. So we've got those sorts of clear gaps that we've implemented before that other people also want to be able to have, I think. So there's probably a whole project of make chart bumps a deployment approach. On the K, go ahead.
It might be that like release tools should perform chart bumps for us. Like we've already got all of the necessary tooling inside of release tools that says, hey, your commit made it to production, right?
Right.
Well, the same thing should be able to apply for chart bumps because it's the same thing. It's just a different method of executing that actual chart bump by modifying which repository and modifying, where to look for that data, release tools has the logic built into it for GitLab or GitLab, we could probably carry the same style of using that exact workflow for chart bumps.
Right. Yeah, that's the sort of stuff. I think we've solved so many of these problems that that's exactly what I think we should do. Yeah. Well, not necessarily exactly that, but exactly that thinking.
Yeah.
Is that manual right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no process. So basically it's when you need one. Well, there is a little bit of a process as of like a week ago, but at the moment it's like, if you need one, like poor Philippe got such a raw deal. Like we started thinking about this because Ahmad got a rough deal at the beginning of the year. And then Philippe got like the ultimate worst deal where he needed to get a chart bump out. It picked up a load of other stuff.
Oh, you want this little thing?
Yeah,
do all
exactly.
of this work.
Exactly. Well, even worse, it was like, here's a nice big breaking change. And he was like, this looks fine. And then he had an incident off it. So he ended up with a heap of extra work for his one thing that was unrelated to any of that. So we have to find a process.
Yeah. Yeah, doing that automated on every change makes a lot of sense, and is basically what we do. The other example that came to my mind was Gitly, like bumping Gitly version in GitLab GitLab or GitLab. Yeah.
Do you think there's too many chart bumps? Is there such a thing as we have bumped this chart so many times it becomes annoying as a chart user?
It's already annoying.
Okay. So you can just keep going.
But like the problem that we have, which makes it annoying, is the process of reviewing. There's a lot of stuff inside of the diff that we don't need to look at. And it just makes the scroll bar tiny because everything has the same exact change.
Yeah.
But like we don't care about it. It just shows up because it's a change.
That's it.
So I think if we could figure out how to make that diff output more friendly to us, that makes the review process simpler. Ideally, if we could figure out how to automate, this is going to sound silly, but if we could automate how to look at the diffs and like automatically ignore certain things that we don't care about, or if we could, on the other side, figure out if the things that change all the time because it's a chart upgrade, the stuff that we don't care about, just ignore that in some way, shape, or form. That would be beneficial. But like, I don't know what inside of our home chart depends on some of that metadata that shows up as a diff.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a whole project around improving that whole chart bump thing.
Is there an issue tracking that idea? Because I know you've mentioned it before, and if there's not, I think I'm going to
create one. I know Graham just completed the first phase, but it didn't specifically say that so much. But I am going to create an epic so we can put it on the board, prioritize it, because I think it covers some of the stuff in this big issue from Graham. And I know it's linked to some other stuff. So we've definitely got that. I feel like there's probably another project as well, which is the pulling apart of the two sides of K8s workloads, because I think if we separate out I'm an SRE and I want to push a config change through a K8s workload pipeline, and I am, a registry developer and I want to bump registry, those things feel so totally different that having them intertwined and also hooked up with auto deploys in a slightly unusual way, I don't think makes it easy for anyone to work with. So I guess pulling some of that stuff apart might make other things easier to improve.
Yeah. Thinking about the review side of things, where we have all of this garbage in the diff, is there a hacky way that we can replace all of that stuff and just get a diff without that crap in it, without having to necessarily remove the versions from the metadata?
There is certainly something we could do in that realm. My fear with that, though, so the two items that come into mind that are we see this all the time and it just makes the diff super long, is the Helm chart version changes, which is expected.
Yes.
And then there's sometimes a lot of white space being added or removed just because of the way Golang templating is working. We could certainly make fancy sed statements that do some fancy regex to remove those and make the
Yeah.
diff easier to look at, right? We could certainly do something like that. My fear, though, is that we don't know where that white space change may occur. And if we just blindly remove that from the diff, it could make other parts of the diff look very awkward. And then we're losing some of the context behind that. Like if a change was added that pushes some white space and then it moves a configuration block, for example, that might change what the YAML looks like. And then we're kind of hiding some of that information because we removed it with that fancy sed, right? So like I would rather tackle stuff like this at our Helm chart, because our Helm chart is what generates this information. So if we could figure out how, like, if there's a procedure in the development of the distribution team that says, hey, this is going to add a white space because you're adding this, we should do something inside the Helm chart that would remove that white space instead. I would prefer that route because you're removing that from the entire Helm chart as a whole. And that kind of benefit would be seen across anyone, even self-managed users who consume our chart. And then the other item for like the changing of the chart version, that would actually be a very simple, hey, look for helm.io/chart_version and ignore the actual version everywhere else. But if that's something that we rely on in a Helm
I mean, that
chart,
would
we
be
might not want to ignore it.
But that could be a change. That could be an option in Helm diff, right?
So the one thing I know that we're doing in Helm diff to show the diff is just controlling how many lines above and below the actual change it shows us. I don't know if there's a way in Helm diff to be like, hey, if you see this particular change, just don't show me. I don't think that option exists. Because technically Helm is providing the diff.
Yeah, we could maybe make that exist.
Accurate. But like, I don't know if that's a Helm update or if that's a Helm file update.
That might be a Helm. Helm diff is not part of Helm itself, right? It's an external plugin. So
yeah, that's correct.
So that might actually make it potentially easier to get changes into
Precisely. Yeah. But then you're gonna, I don't know how, as much as I like that feature, I don't know how beneficial that would be for the open source community though. Like it would benefit us because it's just making reviews easier, but would the wider community accept such a change? Because you're
I think it's
creating
worth a
the ability
shot
to filter stuff out.
Yeah. I think it's worth a shot.
But who knows? Maybe Graham has something up his sleeve that makes this entire process easier that I just haven't heard or seen about, and it renders that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I know Graham has a lot of ideas. I think we're going to end up needing to sort of have the easy things and the kind of the bigger things. Kind of some of the stuff that Graham is quite keen to. Sorry, like it's just like super old school, but like Chris is printing like onto paper. So that's the side of a printer. Just so you know, like we're going back to the 90s. I don't know what it's printing. We have to clean the printer heads every time we use the printer because we don't print often enough for the ink not to dry up. Anyway, so I know Graham's got lots of ideas, but some of them are quite radical. So things like, for example, like moving away from Helm, or like putting everything into Tanker. And I already know, even without us having that as a spec issue, I know there's going to be lots of different opinions. So there will be some of those things I think we can get set up as discussion issues and make, like, for the future, we can make a decision on this and do future stuff. But I'm also hoping there'll be enough stuff that we can just say in Q2, like, here is the project, and we can actually get working to start improving stuff. I would love to not have, like, we're doing the work at the moment to try and get auto deploys to be hands off. So it's a real shame when we have loads of stuff that needs to retry because of other tooling decisions we've made. So hopefully we can get rid of that stuff.
I agree.
So I think for now, in terms of like what to do, like if you have time to read that issue, go for it. But I don't feel like you have to, it's not stalled waiting on you to read it, if that makes sense. There's lots of other things that are going on that issue. And I think we'll switch it into other formats to gather ideas. The cluster one, the cluster recreation stuff, if we could get issues, like if we already know enough to have issues and epics for that, that would be helpful. And then we can just start planning that stuff in.
Okay. I think I created an issue for just rebuilding a cluster.
Okay,
So it's just a matter of getting that prioritized and stuffed inside of our OKRs, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Sounds good. Great. I'm going to open the issue. We can discuss that stuff. So we can just get that straight in there. So
yeah.
Super.
Yeah, I did create an issue. I'll link it into the agenda.
Good stuff.
Cool. Is there anything else that we want to discuss inside of the meeting today?
I had one more item.
Right. Eagle's bringing bad news.
Yeah, I discovered, because I was waiting for a Gitly change to go out, I discovered that the automated merge requests on GitLab to bump the Gitly server version have been blocked on this one AMER. For one, I don't know whose responsibility that is. I don't know if that's on you or if that's on the Gitly team, but it seems like something that kind of nobody was aware of. And I'm wondering whether we need to have a way of detecting that somehow, because it's de facto. I mean, it hasn't really blocked deploys, but we haven't deployed a new version of Gitly since then, right?
Exactly. So there are alerts that get posted in the Gitly channel, but yeah, it's certainly still not great. So it's a super interesting one. I'll take a little look, but it's super. I mean, you can see if you scroll back on the Gitly channel, like you can see all the failing pipelines, and that's the reason basically it gets stuck.
So it sounds like you need to go talk to Andras, and they need to get their well, this is a recorded call, but they need to get their stuff together on that.
So it's a super hard one. Yeah, we definitely have. This is a really interesting one because this is kind of. So this was the best deployment approach available. Well, it is the best deployment approach available for Gitly right now because it's not on Kubernetes. But I think it's a really interesting model that we need to be aware of when we do start moving things like registry and other things like charts and things into deployments, because we end up with this kind of hybrid that doesn't really work for either side, in that because Gitly don't own it end to end, they actually don't. Their day-to-day doesn't really include much attention on deployments. But at the same time, their actions block their own deployment pipeline. It doesn't block all of the deployment pipelines. So that's just why the alerts go to their channel. So we end up on this slightly interesting, nobody is kind of actively unblocking. So I think that's the risk we'll see with other things as well. So yes, I will go and have a chat and see what we can do about kind of getting visibility on that. So yeah, thanks, Igor.
Cheers.
Looking at this merge request is strange because there's no pipeline from anywhere before the 13th, which is strange to me because the bot approved it and marked it as merge, an automatic merge if the pipeline succeeded, but there's no pipeline when the merge request was opened.
Oh, that's odd. That's very odd.
Yeah.
So does the bot actually auto merge it as well usually.
It should do, yeah.
The
If
bot,
Got
it
it.
can,
the bot
yeah.
hits the
See.
auto merge button. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that
Okay.
doesn't always guarantee the merge. There are some
Yeah.
interesting quirks that mean that doesn't always happen, which is also a bit
Now I see. Yes. Okay.
so, yeah. So in
I
the
was
good
missing
days,
that piece. Yeah.
yeah. So in the good days, like, you know, everything just happens. It's all completely automated. But when it's not, when it doesn't quite work out, yeah, it's a little bit. 4 days is quite a long time. So yeah, thank you for raising that. I'll see what we can do about working with them on that one.
This is really surprising to come across, considering that Gitlab is one of their fail points by deployer because of Ansible currently and disk space issues with Prefect.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Oh, speaking of which, so reliability going to have a look and see if there's someone who can pick up that disk space issue, Igor, not Igor, Skarbek. So hopefully we'll get that, but otherwise, if we don't get someone on that today, I propose that we pause all of our projects and pick it up as delivery, and that will
Take a vacation.
That will
Auto deploy is going on vacation while we solve our disk issues.
well, I mean, we can try and fit it around auto deploys if we can, but it will certainly impact like registry and SSHD, and I'm sure we have a few other things that are queued on us as well. But getting this solved this week would be very good. I would actually rather pause auto deploys tomorrow and get this fixed versus go into next week prepping the monthly release and having to deal with this as well. That would be worse than not deploying tomorrow.
I don't think it's that bad. I think we could probably pull one server out of rotation, upgrade the disk as necessary, and deploys might be paused for a few minutes while that happens.
I was thinking more about people. I'm thinking more about you
yeah.
actually. When I say people, no, there aren't very many. We're so short on people this week. There's only you and Ahmad. So if we get to your day tomorrow starting and we haven't solved this, I think we should just make a call and pause auto deploys and solve this instead.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. How is Redis going, Igor?
Yes, Ahmad is back on the project, and we had a sync yesterday and a quick pairing session today. We ran into one issue, which is so we're trying to enable host names. We're still trying to enable host names support, and the new issue that popped up is those can currently only be enabled by setting a host name as like the replica announce IP. And that means we need to set explicitly the host name per Redis host. And so we'd have to have a separate chef config for Redis 01, Redis 02, Redis 03, which we don't want that, right? We want to just set a single role. And we actually don't have a good way of doing that currently. So what I started working on is adding a little hack that allows you to set a flag in Chef that's just a true or false. And it'll then do a hostname -f and set that, like shell out and set that as its hostname. So basically changing it from static to dynamic. And that way we can not put host names into config files because that's a losing game. So that's an omnibus MR that Ahmad is debugging the spec failures on. And yeah, once we get that in, hopefully that's the last blocker before we can roll through with enabling Sentinel host names everywhere. The script, Henry prepared the script, and that's ready to go. So once that's in, we can run through pre and then run through all of the other environments.
Nice. Okay, great. Does Ahmad need any like back-end engineer help? Like, are these spec failures sort of obvious ones, or would it be useful to get engineer on here as well, a back-end engineer on here as well?
I think we're good for now. We paired on it today. He seems he's more capable than I am at debugging this stuff. So I think we're good.
Okay, awesome. Great. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Excellent. Was there anything else we want to chat about? Okay. Well, in that case, thanks for joining, everyone, all two of you, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for
Bye.
having me. Bye.
Have a good one.